All right. Can everybody hear me all right? Mic's on? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Campbell, and I'm a regional coordinator for Young Women for America. It's a project of Concerned Women for America, which is the nation's largest public policy organization. So we are so grateful to be co-sponsoring tonight with Clare Boothe Luce Center for Conservative Women. And I just wanted to give a quick summary of what Concerned Women for America is and what we do. So we are a faith-based nonprofit, and we are based in Washington, D.C. And what we do is we seek to pray for, advocate for, and educate women in America about biblical principles and constitutional values. So we have 7 core issues, and these are sanctity of life, defense of the family, education, religious liberty, national sovereignty, sexual exploitation, and support for Israel. And in speaking of tonight's issue of protecting women in sports, we have been really involved in this fight. We have girls all across the nation testifying for legislation to protect women in sports. And then just this past January, Speaker Kevin McCarthy invited 2 of our ambassadors, along with Riley, to come and speak about protecting women's sports. So we have been very involved in this fight. And if you are involved in this fight about women's sports or any of the issues I mentioned, we would love to have you come join our network. So for ages 15 to 27 girls, we have Young Women for America. And then for ages 27 and up, we have Concerned Women for America. If you want any more information, you can go on our website, or we have a table back there. And you can also just come up to me and ask for more information. So I'm going to now introduce Emily Cope, who is the president of our chapter here at Clemson.
Well, good evening. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Emily Cope, and I'm the president of the Young Women for America chapter here at Clemson. I would first like to thank CUPD and other security personnel for their work, not only in keeping us safe this evening, but also for their diligent work that they do every day. Thank you also to the Clemson administration and faculty for their amazing help in allowing us to host this event here in the Watt Center. Our sponsors this evening are Young Women for America and the Clare Boothe Luce Center for Conservative Women. We are so grateful to both of them for their commitment to the important issue our guest is speaking on tonight, as well as the resources and time they've dedicated to our Clemson chapter. If you're interested in joining our Clemson chapter, you can follow us at YWA Clemson on Instagram, or fill out the interest form at the table at the back of the auditorium. There will be a Q&A following Riley's remarks tonight, so if you're interested in raising a question, raise your hand and a microphone will be brought to you. Please make sure you're asking a question. At the conclusion of the event, we ask that you remain in your seat until after our speaker leaves. Now to present our incredible guest. Riley Gaines is the Stand With Women spokeswoman for Independent Women's Forum and a recent graduate from the University of Kentucky, where she was a 12-time All-American swimmer. Riley has made waves for speaking out after tying UPenn swimmer Leah Thomas, a biological male swimmer, on the women's team at the 2022 NCAA Division I Women's Swimming and Diving Championships. After Riley directly experienced competing against a man in women's sports, she became one of the first female college athletes to speak out against the injustice, challenging the rules of the NCAA, USA Swimming, International Olympic Committee, and other governing bodies. Riley has encouraged other female athletes to come forward and highlight why this issue is blatantly unfair and harmful to females. She's been traveling the country speaking out about the need to protect women's spaces, and we're so excited to have her here tonight. Please join me in welcoming Riley Gaines.
Aw. Thank you guys. I don't typically like orange because I'm not a UT fan, but I guess this orange is a little better than UT orange. But first of all, I want to thank YWA, the Clare Boothe Luce Center, everyone, the PD who are here. I'm really extremely grateful. But first of all, it's nice to see smiling faces. My recent experience at San Francisco did not go just kindly. I was not welcomed. So a little bit about that. I'm sure maybe some of you have seen this on the news and such, but really it was terrifying. I went to San Francisco to deliver a speech very similar to what I'm talking to you guys about. But instead of being met with open minds and again, welcoming, I was met with an ambush. After my speech, these protesters, they ambushed into the room, they turned the lights off, they physically assaulted me. I was struck twice. I was barricaded in a room for 3 hours where They demanded money from me if I wanted to make it home safely, which the dean of students was actually negotiating with them. And I'm sitting there listening to this behind a closed door. I'm like, are we really negotiating if I make it home safely? This is crazy. So that's why I'm just so grateful to see smiling faces. But a little about me. I graduated from the University of Kentucky last year. I see a Kentucky shirt over here, which is always a blessing. And another one back there. Any more blue? Some blue. But I got my degree in human health sciences and health law with every intent on being in dental school this year. I put that off this past year because I realized the relevance and the importance of what I'm here to talk to you guys about might not always be there, but dental school will be. And so I sidelined that. I'm now set to go to the University of Tennessee in the fall. I know I just said I don't like orange, but that's the way it plays out. But a little bit about my swimming. I started swimming at the age of 4. I'm 22 now, so I've dedicated 18 years of my life to my sport. It's impossible to put into words the amount of time and sacrifices and effort and dedication that it takes to compete at that level. I started swimming year-round when I was 8 years old. So this meant that in 2nd grade, you're swimming 2 hours every single day. And it really only gets worse from there, because by the time you get to middle school and high school, you're practicing before school. Then you go to school, you come back from school, go straight to practice. You come home from practice, you ice your shoulder, you eat your dinner, you do your homework, you go to bed, you wake up, and you do it all again the next day. You miss out on prom, you don't get to go on vacation. You don't have sleepovers with your friends. But again, no one forced us to do this. This is just what we were willing to do to compete at the highest level. And so my junior year of high school rolls around, and to be totally transparent, I was pretty heavily recruited. I really could have gone anywhere I wanted in the country to swim. Clemson doesn't have a swim team, so we should get on that. But I really could have gone anywhere I wanted. And I'm sorry, guys, I am biased. I think the SEC is the best conference. And so I knew I wanted to stay somewhere in the SEC. My dad, he was an SEC football player. My mom, she played softball. All my uncles played in the SEC. But I always thought I was going to be a Florida Gator. And so I took my trip to Florida, and I had the expectation in my head too high for what it really was. And so I didn't love it. But my boyfriend at the time, which I'm happily married now to, not the same boyfriend, but my boyfriend at the time, he was a big Kentucky fan. And they didn't have a great swimming school or anything. But I thought it'd be pretty cool, if I took a trip there and we got to go to a basketball game. That'd be a pretty cool girlfriend thing to do. I could take him as a little +1. And so we went. But truthfully, I fell in love with the campus, with the coaches, with the team, with the academic resources. It was not by any means what I expected for myself to fall in love with. But kind of on a whim, not even telling my parents, I committed to the university. And it was truthfully the best decision I could have made for myself. Looking back now, especially seeing what other girls at other universities have gone through, I had a fantastic experience. Freshman year rolls around. It was good. I did some good things, but it was a lot of adjusting. We were swimming 6 hours every day, 3 hours before 8 a.m. Of course, 5 to 8, and then you come back and it's 1:30 to 4:30. And so I think I was just wrecked for an entire year. So good things, but I knew I could do better. So sophomore year rolls around, and I finally developed this sense of consistency. I was able to perform well every day in practice. I was having this breakout season, really. Our NCAA championships roll around. I'm all geared up, ready to go. But about 3 days before we were supposed to leave for our national championships in March of 2020, COVID hits. So again, right before we were supposed to go, it felt like we had worked this whole year for nothing. Our coaches, they took us back in the team room and they sat us down and they said, we have to send you home. And I was secretly like, oh my gosh, yes. Like, we never get a break. This is going to be so fun. The only break we get all year is a week off in August, and you're there all summer, all Christmas, all Thanksgiving. And so I was so excited for about 2 days. And then it kind of set in like, okay, now what? I know we're going to have to come back eventually. And swimming is not necessarily a sport that you can just take time off, jump back in, and be fine. And so I began to stress, No pools were open, no gyms were open. And so I'm very fortunate that I'm from Tennessee, where there's lots of lakes. And so every day I put on a wetsuit and swam miles aimlessly in the lake, just hoping to continue improving, hoping that I would come back my junior year and be in a place where I wasn't at a disadvantage. And that's exactly what happened. We were eventually able to come back my junior year, and I was in a really good position. Whereas a lot of my teammates and competitors, they didn't have the same blessing of a lake that I had. I essentially picked right back up where I left off. I had this breakout season. This was my first year where I was able to win an individual Southeastern Conference championship. We won a relay. We won as a team, which was the first time we'd ever done that in school history at University of Kentucky. So really awesome things. At our NCAA championships, I finished 7th in the country, which I was proud of. I was an All-American. It was a great honor. But again, I knew I could do more. And this is really when I set the goal to become a national champion, which would, of course, mean becoming the fastest female in the country in my event. And so senior year rolls around, and I'm right on track to do so. I was ranked, at the middle of our season, I was ranked 3rd in the country, behind one amazing female swimmer who I knew very well, because like in most sports, your top tier athletes, you know of each other, regardless of where you compete in the country, because you've grown up competing against each other. And so the girl in 2nd, I knew very well. But the swimmer who was ranked 1st by multiple seconds, I'd never heard of. So this was very bizarre to me for a couple reasons. One of which, the swimmer was a senior, which is bizarre. No one really comes out of nowhere their senior year. The swimmer was also from University of Pennsylvania, which is not a school that historically produces fast swimmers. Think of football. Clemson is historically a school that has a good football team. And so to have this swimmer from University of Pennsylvania was bizarre. 3, this person was leading the country in the 100 freestyle, which is a sprint, and all of the freestyle events in between until the mile. And so, of course, the 100 is a sprint, the mile is long distance. Let's think of our Olympic runners. Your best 200-meter runner is not your best marathon runner. They're totally different systems. But again, that's what we were seeing in this swimmer. So there was lots of head scratching. There was lots of talking to my coach, my teammates, who is this person? Never once did it occur to me this was anything other than a female, because I thought that was so far-fetched and would never happen. Until a few days after these nation-leading times were posted, an article came out disclosing that very brief sentence, as if we were supposed to just read right over it and continue on with the article like it didn't just say this. But very briefly mentioned, Leah Thomas is formerly Will Thomas and swam 3 years on the men's side at University of Pennsylvania before transitioning to the women's team. Continued on with the article. And so my coach sent me the link, and he was like, you need to read this. So I read it, and I read it again. And I was shocked. Again, I thought this was something that would never happen, especially at the collegiate level. And while I was shocked, I felt almost a sense of relief. I thought, surely I could look up who Leah Thomas was as Will Thomas and see, was this the lateral movement? Was this someone who went from ranking 1st among the men to continuing to rank 1st among the women, which is not what we saw. Upon looking up who Will Thomas was, this was a mediocre male at best, ranking 462nd nationally among the men the year prior, now leading the nation. So that's why I say I was relieved, because I thought the NCAA would see this exactly how I saw it, exactly how my teammates saw it, exactly how any rational person would see it. But that's not how the NCAA saw it. They saw absolutely nothing wrong with this. And again, this is not something that was opinionated. This was not something that was hateful. The sheer facts of it, what's on the paper in front of us. But again, they saw nothing wrong with this. And so about 3 weeks before our national championships in March of last year, the NCAA announced that Leah Thomas would in fact be competing with the women. And so I really got to personally feel the effect that this infringement had on not just myself, but every swimmer at that meet. That first day of competition was the 500 freestyle. That event is too long for me, so I don't do that event. But I sat on the side of the pool and watched. And for those of you who don't know how swimming at this level works, you swim prelims in the morning and you have to qualify top 16 to come back and swim it again at night. And that's where you'll get your overall national ranking. And so I'm sitting there watching this in the morning, feeling so frustrated. That was really my feeling. It was just kind of frustration, not necessarily with Thomas, but with the NCAA. Again, in this state of confusion as how they saw this was fair, which they didn't. But so I'm watching these prelim heats. There's about 8 heats or so. And so one of the girls from Virginia Tech, her name is Reka. She's from Hungary. She stayed a 5th year. Because of COVID, we got an extra year of eligibility. And so she stayed her extra year. And she had just swam in one of the previous heats. And so she got out of the water and she wanted to see if she would be top 16 to come back that night. And so she's standing next to me. I knew her, not overly well. And so we're standing next to each other and she's watching this final heat where Thomas is swimming, where Thomas is dominating. Again, beating all the girls by body lengths. And she looks up at the board as this last heat finishes and she realized she got 17th. And so she grabs my hand. Again, I didn't know her that well. She grabs my hand, looks at me with tears streaming down her face and she said, I got beat by someone who didn't even have to try. And this is when my feelings shifted because again, up until this point, I just felt kind of angry. But when Reka looked at me and said that, and I saw how this impacted her, it felt like heartbreak. It felt like I'd been punched in the gut watching one of my competitors feel this way, so hopeless. And so that night, we came back and Leah Thomas swam to a national title, becoming the first male to win a national title in the women's division. Again, beating U.S. Olympians, many U.S. Olympians, beating American record holders, the most impressive female swimmers this country has ever seen by seconds. And a second doesn't sound like a lot, but in swimming, that is a lot. This is a sport that's measured down to the 100th of a second. So to have one person beating the entire rest of the country by multiple seconds, that's a rarity. And so that next day of competition is the 200 freestyle, which is an event that I did. I don't do it anymore. No one wants to see me do that. And so we raced in the morning. Thomas and I, we both qualified top 8 for that final heat at night. We come back that evening, we race, and almost impossibly enough, we tied. We went the exact same time down to the 100th of a second. I think our time was 1 minute, 43 seconds, and 52 100ths or something of that nature. And so upon tying, we get out of the water and we go behind the awards podium where they'll march you out and you'll stand up there with your little dinky wooden trophy and you're named an All-American. And so we go behind the podium and the NCAA official looks at both Thomas and myself and says, great job. You guys tied and we don't really account for ties. So Leah gets the trophy. And so I was taken aback by this. I understood we tied. I understand there's one trophy. But I asked him, why are you adamant on giving this trophy to Thomas? And this was not a question they were prepared to answer because no one had questioned anything they had done thus far. And so he kind of stumbled on his words a little bit and just, well, we're doing this in chronological order. And so I further pressed him and I said, okay, well, what are you being chronological about? Because we tied and technically G comes before T, but whatever. But he said, Leah has to have the trophy for photo purposes. You can pose with this one, but you'll give it back. You go home empty-handed and Leah takes the trophy home. And that is what really, that's when I was done waiting for someone else to speak up. Because up until this point, I thought surely a parent or a coach or someone within the NCAA, someone with political power, someone with the power to do something, someone who is supposed to be protecting us would protect us. But again, that's not what we were seeing. And so then it really hit me that if we as female athletes weren't willing to stick up for ourselves, how could we expect someone else to stick up for us? And so that's what's pushed me over the edge. But there's a couple pieces about this meet that I want to mention that I think the media has done a pretty bad job of covering. First of all, the locker room. Obviously, the unfair competition was wrong, but this locker room, aspect of it all felt like betrayal. It felt, I don't know if there's a great word for it, but truly the word is trauma. I mean, I can't even express to you. First, let me kind of set the scene of the swimming locker room. It's not necessarily a place of modesty. These suits that you put on, they're like teeny tiny. If there's any swimmers in here, you know they're tiny suits. They take about 15 minutes to really poke and prod and tuck all your skin rolls into these suits. And so 15 minutes of which you're fully exposed. But it's also a place of buzzing and chatter. You're almost comfortable being vulnerable in that environment because growing up a swimmer, you're used to it. But it's a place of buzzing and chatter. You get to see your friends from all over the country who you haven't seen all year. And so it's a place of excitement. But I can't even tell you the silence in the room when you turn around and there's a 6'4", 22-year-old biological male fully intact with and exposing male genitalia in an area where you as women are undressing. It was a subconscious, innate feeling to want to cover yourself. And let me be clear, we were not forewarned we would be sharing this changing space. No one alerted us that we would be in a locker room with someone of the opposite sex. No one asked for our consent. We did not give our consent. And so when we saw this with our own eyes, I immediately left the locker room. And I went up to one of the officials who was on the pool deck and I said, I understand the guidelines for the meet. It was 1 year, 12 months of hormone suppression, to which they didn't check. It's just, I guess, a hearsay. If you say you've done 12 months of hormone suppression, you can be a woman. So I understood those guidelines, but I asked this official, what are the guidelines in place for the locker room? Word for word, this is what he says. Oh, we actually got around this by making the locker rooms unisex. And so I'm like, unisex. Okay, so that means any man could have entered our locker room, not even just a self-identifying female, any man, any coach, any official, and bare minimum, we were not forewarned we would be sharing this changing space. And that's why I say it felt like betrayal. Of course, it's awkward, it's embarrassing, it's uncomfortable, it's belittling. But again, the people who were supposed to be protecting us did not protect us. But there's another piece of this meet that I want to mention that, again, I think the media has done a really terrible job covering. At this same meet where we had Leah Thomas, who is, of course, a male transitioning to female, we also had another athlete who identified as trans, except this athlete was a female transitioning to male. Formerly Izzy, now goes by Isaac, used he, him pronouns, had a double mastectomy, and swam only in a Speedo. But I say this because if we were basing this off gender identity, then why do we have someone who identifies as a male? We're expected to, use the correct pronouns, treat Isaac as a male. Why are they competing with the women? And I can answer this question. It's because Isaac never would have been able to compete with the men at the same level. Since then, this past year, Isaac is competing with the men. Isaac finished among the women, top 5 in the country, I think 5th or 6th, actually, in the 100 freestyle. So an All-American, the 5th fastest female in the country. But now competing against the men, finishes dead last every single time. And I don't say that to be funny. I don't say that to highlight, make a mockery of Isaac's transition. It's to show how the women's category is what's at jeopardy here. The only meet I watched of Isaac's this year, and again, I'm not saying this in any reason other than to highlight exactly the severity of what we as women dealt with. The only meet I watched of Isaac's this year was a meet where Isaac beat one male swimmer, and this male swimmer had one arm. Take that for what it's worth. But after all of this, I tried to rationalize with the NCAA. I tried to give the NCAA grace. I thought, maybe this is something that was presented very quickly. They didn't have time to handle it. Maybe it's a one-off basis. They'll revisit their rules and it won't happen again. And so I started doing my own research in the rules that were put in place in 2010. I was like, okay, that's 12 years ago. They'll definitely revise. We have enough science and evidence and data now that tells us 1 year of hormone suppression is not enough to mitigate male advantage. they'll fix this and no girl will have to go through what we did. And so a couple weeks after this, I got an email from my university, UK, and they alerted me that I was nominated for NCAA Woman of the Year, which is the highest, most prestigious honor for a collegiate female athlete. And so it's something that encompasses, of course, your athletic achievements, but also your academic success, your community service, just your leadership skills, your characteristics. And so I was the SEC Scholar Athlete of the Year. I was the SEC Community Service Leader of the Year. I'm the SEC record holder in the 200 butterfly. And so it's something I focus on being well-rounded. It's something that's really important to me is my service and academics as well, not just my sport. And so when I got this nomination, I was so excited because at the University of Kentucky, we had the #1 WNBA draft pick. We have Abby Steiner, who's breaking world records in track and field. We had a national championship volleyball team, a national championship rifle team, but they nominated me. And I was so humbled by this until a few weeks later when a full list of the nominees for NCAA Woman of the Year was released. And it was not exclusive to just women. That's when I saw Leah Thomas was also nominated for Woman of the Year. And that's immediately when I realized, first and foremost, that award was totally devalued and meaningless to me. But second, I realized how silly it was for me to try to give the NCAA grace because this wasn't something that happened on a one-off basis. This wasn't something that they were going to fix. This is something they were encouraging and they were celebrating. And so I called my athletic director. His name is Mitch Barnhart. He is a phenomenal guy. And we had a great relationship over my 4 years. And so I called him and I said, hey, this is what happened. This is how we feel, we being my teammates at the University of Kentucky. I said, how do you feel if I take a public stance on this matter? And I think we can all agree swimming is not necessarily a sport that generates media attention. But there was a lot of media outlets at that meet, both right and left-leaning outlets who were desperately reaching out to the swimmers. They would find your name on the heat sheet and they would find your Instagram handle or your Twitter and they would DM you hoping someone would bite the hook and give them a quote they could use. And no one was. And so after Thomas and I tied, my inbox was full. But my athletic director, he said, Riley, we love you. He said, I support you. I would support whatever stance you took. I remember this vividly. He said, speak your heart, which is something that has just stuck with me. He said, stay true to your convictions, never back down from what you believe to be right and moral. He said, don't worry about painting this university in a bad light. We're behind you with whatever approach you take. And so I didn't think much of it. I was like, okay, thanks, bye, like hung up. I thought that's how any athletic director would treat their student athlete, which, oh my gosh, I could not have been more wrong about that assumption. And I'll kind of get into that. But I kind of reluctantly agreed to give someone from the Daily Wire a quote. She called me and I filled her in on what happened. And this was really the first time the trophy story got brought to light. And the story blew up, I think, for a couple reasons, one of which being sports is something that resonates with everyone. Who doesn't love sports? It's a lot more interesting than a lot of the stuff in the media, like the economy or like the environment or something. I don't know. So everyone loves sports. Two, I think a lot of people realize the locker room piece and really just the overall severity of what we were dealing with. Because I think when you hear the term trans woman, you think of someone who's fully committed to transitioning, someone who has computable testosterone levels, someone who has gone through all of the reassignment surgeries. But again, that is not what we saw. And so this Daily Wire hit very quickly turned into Fox News and CPAC and different things. And I very quickly got labeled as a right-wing grifter. So I started, this felt great at the time. I was spreading the story, which was important to me. But again, very quickly, I felt like I was almost preaching to the choir. All of the old men who watch Fox, they already agreed with me. How could I get the people who don't agree with me to hear what I'm saying? And so I started reaching out to CNN. I started reaching out to MSNBC. I started reaching out to local sites around Kentucky and Nashville. I'm from Nashville, hoping someone would pick this up because they were reporting on the stories. So I figured I would offer them a new perspective to share. And every single one of these outlets every single one, again, while actively reporting on the story, every single one told me, no, we don't want to give you a platform to spread your hate. And so this was hard for me. I wanted to communicate the message to a larger audience. It's not hate. It's nothing hateful about it. I just wanted to share my experience, exactly what happened. But they weren't willing to listen. So I kind of continued on with talking about it in the media as much as I could and to anyone who would listen. But I very quickly felt like I was almost whining. I was kind of sick of hearing my own voice. I'm sure there's lots of others who were sick of hearing my voice too. And my parents, they always taught me either put up or shut up. You can complain all you want, you can whine all you want, but unless you're willing to do something to make changes, then it does no good. And so, like I said, I began to feel like I was whining. And so I was ready to make changes. What could I do? How can I enact changes? And that's when I really started getting involved on the policy legislature side of things. I began traveling state to state, sharing my testimony in whatever state legislature was putting this bill forward. I think I've traveled to probably 20 or so states, Colorado, Kansas, Ohio, I mean, all of them. So far, there's been 20 states that have passed a fairness in women's sports bill. The most recent one I just came from, North Carolina, just drove up, or I guess down, just drove down right before I got here, where I testified today. And it passed through the House successfully, and so it will be heard in the Senate tomorrow, which is good news. So hopefully 21 states soon, 16 of which protecting the collegiate level, which is awesome. At the federal level, obviously Title IX is a federal civil rights law that is supposed to prevent discrimination on the basis of sex on college campuses. We have an administration in the White House who is actively working to rewrite Title IX. So it's no longer preventing discrimination on the basis of sex. It would be preventing discrimination on the basis of gender identity. So what this means is men could join sororities, men could live in dorm rooms with women, men would have full access to any restroom changing space on campus, men would of course be able to take both academic and athletic scholarships from women. In this new rewrite, it's actually sexual harassment to misgender someone. It's not sexual harassment for someone of the opposite sex to be parading around your locker room exposing opposite genitalia, but if you misgender them, it is, and you're guilty of it. But there are good things being done. I'm traveling to DC tomorrow morning. This bill on the House side, it's called the Stubbe bill. It will uphold Title IX, is being heard tomorrow, and they're confident it will pass, so that's good news. There's a bill similar on the Senate side that is to uphold Title IX. So good things are being done. A lot of this has really come to light last June, but even this past week, the Biden administration is releasing new guidelines and such. So make sure you're following along. It'll be interesting. But I'm appreciating the good things that are being done. I know this battle is nowhere near being won, but another good thing that's just been done is World Athletics. Some of you might have seen this as well. They just released new guidelines to prohibit anyone who has gone through male puberty from competing against the women in track and field. And this is great because it encompasses the Olympic level. They followed FINA's guidelines, which is essentially the same thing for swimming. So lots of good things being done. I kind of want to touch on the silencing piece because I know I told you how my athletic director responded, which again is a blessing. But as I mentioned, that's a rarity. Once I was nominated for NCAA Woman of the Year, they were having a big conference where they would announce who was the winner. It was in San Antonio. It's all the athletic directors go, the president of the NCAA goes, presidents of each university will go. It's a pretty big deal. They have education meetings and stuff all week. And so I decided I would go to this, not in support, of course, but I was able to hand a petition directly to the NCAA with over 11,000 or so signatures that we garnered in just a matter of days. And we were able to directly hand the NCAA a legal demand letter saying if they don't stop discriminating on the basis of sex, there will be legal action taken. And this was the farthest anyone had gone to directly telling the NCAA this. I had sent email after email and letter after letter for 8 months, no response, of course. But at this conference, they had a big convention hall where you could buy a booth. Companies, organizations, they could buy a booth, and these athletic directors would walk around, and you could try and sell your product. And so I figured I'll buy a booth, and I'll hand out little pamphlets explaining why Title IX is important and why we should protect female sports. And I applied to buy a booth with the name Riley Gaines. Denied. I tried again. Denied. I came up with an alias, and they were like, of course we'll take your money. So I got a booth inside this convention center to where I did exactly what I explained. We had little wristbands, passing them out. Every single athletic director who walked by, every single one, hey, keep doing what you're doing. It's so important. Keep fighting. We support you. The first 60 or so, I was like, wow, this is awesome. They agree with us. This is huge. After the number kept growing of athletic directors who were saying the exact same thing, it began to feel frustrating. If we all are on the same page, why are we catering to the minority? And so I began asking them, thank you for saying this, but would you say so publicly? Oh, no, we don't want a lawsuit. I can't lose my job, so I don't feel comfortable saying something publicly. I'm sorry. And then quickly walked away, which again was extremely frustrating for me. Even the president of the NCAA, who has now stepped down, Mark Emmert, who after our championships released a statement saying he unequivocally stood in his decision to allow Leah to swim because it was based in evolving science. He came up and said, hey, keep fighting. Keep doing what you're doing. And I just thought to myself, the irony for him to tell me to keep fighting because he is the one we're fighting against. And I say this because it shows the true cowardice, the lack of authenticity, the lack of leadership, the lack of a backbone that these people in the position to make changes have. Even the host rep, this meet took place at Georgia Tech, our national championships. Even the host rep of the Georgia Tech meet, he sent me a screenshot of what the NCAA emailed out to his staff before allowing this meet to occur there. And it said, you are not allowed to speak up in opposition of this meet being here, or else there will be consequences. So that's what they dealt with. These people were terrified. But for the female athletes, again, I cannot reiterate enough how unique my experience was. I've talked to Leah Thomas's teammates at great lengths over these past year, really. It is abysmal what they went through on a daily basis. They were forced every week to go to mandatory LGBTQ meetings to learn about how just by being cisgender, they were oppressing Leah Thomas. When they were initially uncomfortable in the locker room and sent an email to their administration alongside their parents on this email thread, and I swear I have a screenshot of the response. Their administration responded back with, if you feel uncomfortable seeing male genitalia in your locker room, here are some counseling resources that you should seek. They were told that they cannot take a stance because their school has already taken their stance for them. They were told you will never get a job, you will lose your friends, you won't get into grad school, you'll lose your scholarship if you speak up. They were told if you happen to speak up and any harm whatsoever comes towards Thomas's way, whether it be emotional, physical harm, any kind of harm, then you are solely responsible. So these girls, it's emotional blackmail. They were gaslit into silence, which is a lot scarier, a lot more chilling than the whole fairness in women's sports piece. To think of how these administrations are silencing their athletes. And also the parents. I've had so many parents reach out to me, daughters who are in elementary school, middle school, who have a male playing on their middle school basketball team, who say, I want to protect my daughter, but I work a corporate job. I can't risk, I'm the breadwinner. I can't risk losing my job. So even the parents aren't willing to defend their daughters. I could list example after example of really what that whole aspect looks like in terms of submission to allowing these athletes to use their voice. But a year later, a year after all this, first of all, I want to mention the times Leah went last year, would have again won this year, beat everyone in the country. But a year later, a year after all of this, I've stepped back from swimming, and I'm looking at this whole movement, all of the gender ideology propaganda. Why is this happening? And I'm realizing it's a lot bigger than just sports. We're changing the language we use. They have a list of offensive words now, and mother is on there, and breastfeeding. It's now birthing person, and we're chest feeders, I guess. The Cambridge Dictionary has changed the definition of woman. So again, that's chilling to think of how our language is changing. Look at what's happening in prisons. You have men who are convicted of awful things such as child pornography, kidnapping, rape, who now realize all you have to do to be a woman is say, I am a woman, to get into women's prisons. Women typically get lesser charges. Wouldn't it sound awesome to a rapist to be housed with women? And that's exactly what's happening. They're getting in these spaces and they're impregnating women. It's happened in Kansas, Ohio, New Jersey, California. Just in recent weeks in California, over 1,300 men applied to be women to get into women's prisons. And that's not to say that every person who identifies as transgender transitions solely to get into women's locker rooms or women's prisons or women's shelters or to win medals. I do genuinely believe there are people who struggle with gender dysphoria, but can we not acknowledge how the systems that we have in place open that door for people to take advantage of it? It's very easy for someone who would transition solely to get in women's prisons and women's locker rooms to do that. And so I'll give you guys a few examples. I could list example after example after example, but I'll list just a couple. There's a freshman in high school in Vermont. Her name is Blake Allen. She's 14 years old. She is on her high school's volleyball team. And this past year, a male was allowed on her school's team. Very similar situation where they were sharing a locker room, and these 14-year-old girls felt uncomfortable in this changing space. And so they immediately went to they kind of nominated Blake. They were like, Blake, you go talk to the coach. We're scared. And so Blake really stepped up and took one for the team and went to her administrator and said, we feel uncomfortable in this locker room. And the administration responded with suspending her. She got suspended from school. Her dad got fired from his job. And they said, the only way we will let you back into school is if you write an apology letter and publicly read it. To which Blake said no and responded with, I'm suing. And her school quickly said, come back, because they know they had no grounds to do that. Today in North Carolina, some of you might have seen the video pretty recently. It was in, I think, September of last year, of this high school volleyball player who had a volleyball slammed in her face by a male. If you saw the video, this ball looks like it's moving at 150 miles an hour, hits her directly in the face. She was unconscious, knocked out. Keep in mind, it's April now. This happened in September. I talked to her today. She still is struggling with vision problems. She is partially paralyzed on her right side. She cannot retain information anymore, so she has to have accommodations from school to do her schoolwork. She had every intention of playing in college, but now she doesn't want to play sports. She plays softball now still, but she can't play at the same level she once did. So this has changed her life forever. And I think the injury piece is important to mention. It's something I often forget because swimming is not necessarily a sport with physical contact, but there are sports that are. Lacrosse, softball, volleyball, rugby, whatever that might look like. There's lots of sports anywhere where you're running at one another, colliding, striking something, hitting a ball. You do have to worry about injury. Men on average, of course, there's 50% more upper body strength, 60% more lower body strength. They can throw a 212% stronger punch. I could go on and on about these statistics, but that's another piece of this is injury. Another piece to this is a lot of women who play sports, especially at the amateur level or professional level, it's their means for income. It's how they make money. We're seeing it a lot right now in cycling, disc golf, where men are entering into women's arenas and they're taking their prize money. I wonder why I didn't play disc golf, actually, because there's a male, Natalie Ryan, who just this year alone has taken $47,000 in prize money away from women. $1,000 here in cycling. It's happening all over. And again, I could list example after example, but I'll kind of wrap up by just sharing my 2 cents on what this all is. What this is denying objective truth. To deny what a woman is, what a man is to deny the sheer essence of humanity. Hate to break it to you, but we're all here from a man and a woman, and we're denying that. And really what I think this is spiritual warfare. This is no longer right versus wrong or good versus bad. This is moral versus evil. And I had a conversation the other day with someone in the room, and I expressed this to him, but I've been thinking about it a lot. It's really, the direction this is going is it's really deeply rooted in Marxism, where we have the changing of the language, the silencing, the breaking down of faith and family and freedoms. And again, that's really chilling. We can take a step back and look at what's happened in history when we've allowed something like this to happen. And it's not pretty. And so I'll open it up for questions. If there is anything that I did not do a good job explaining, or if there are any questions anyone had, I would love to answer them. And thank you. I appreciate you guys being here again, being willing to listen. That's the first step in making changes, being willing to listen, have open dialogue. Really important. So I appreciate you guys.
If y'all have a question and you're like in the middle, can you like walk to one of the sides?
Thanks. Hi, my name's Sandy. I don't know if you remember me,
Of
but
course.
I'm Allie and Danielle's
Of
mom.
course.
My girls swam with Riley, so
Her daughter was a national champion.
yeah, thanks. Just also the whole family supports you, Riley. Haven't reached out personally, but came tonight because I wanted to just let you know. So my question is, what can we do? I'm a mom. I'm in Middle America. You know, what things can we do individually to make a difference?
Absolutely.
And then I'm really speaking about the women in sports. Like, I'm so angry
Absolutely.
about it all.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I wish I'd have gone to Atlanta and carried a picket sign outside. I really wish I had.
It's okay. My dad was there for that. First and foremost, I think I hate to say stay informed because it makes me sound like an activist. But I do think it's really important to stay up to date on this happening because what the opposition likes to say, I saw it in North Carolina today, I've seen it in every state I've traveled to, is this isn't really happening. Why should we, why would we take precedent in fixing this when it's not happening? There's only, in North Carolina, they said this today, there's only 3 trans athletes in North Carolina. That is so not true. But that's the narrative they like to push. And so I think staying informed on this happening, I always try and post breaking stories on my Twitter for people to see because I think it's important. 2, I think being willing to talk about it. What I've noticed, especially with girls who are my age, who are directly impacted by this, they feel the same way I do, but in kind of a group setting, they shy away from actually sharing their feelings, which is why we've gotten to the point we're at. We need to feel comfortable saying in a compassionate, civil, respectful way, this is wrong. This is unfair to women. That's the whole argument, is it's unfair. Nothing rooted in hate. Again, it's just simply unfair. And so I think talking about it. 3, I think an effective way to talk about it, and again, this is something I've noticed in hearing the opposition, they always tried to make it about humanity. They always tried to make it about, feelings, and they make it very emotional. And it works very well, because we as humans, we have compassion. We should have compassion. And so I think what people in support of what I'm talking about don't do very well is explain it from, what about as female athletes, what about our feelings? What about how our safety is being is under threat and our privacy is not being protected? What I've seen is we're valuing one group's mental health and feelings and self-perception and identity over another group's, which raises the question, of course, how do you pick one group's mental health, value, worth, self-perception, feelings to value over another? And I don't think there's a perfect answer for that. Well, we shouldn't pick one group to value over another, but right now what's happening is we're catering to the radical minority at the expense of the majority, which is the opposite of what it means to live in a democracy. And so I think talking about it in a compassionate way, making it emotional about us as women on our side, I think that's something that's impactful and has an effect. Good to
Hey,
see
Ron.
you.
So recently I was listening to Piers Morgan talk to Congresswoman Katie Porter in California. And in that, the Congresswoman said that you're doing this to generate likes and clicks, and also heavily implied that you're doing this just for yourself and not for others. So I was just wondering, how do you handle that? And how do you think these people justify thinking that?
Well, if you watch just before that clip where she says that, she applauds Dylan Mulvaney. And I'm like, okay, if you can acknowledge he's doing stuff for clicks, yet saying, whatever. But truthfully, when someone says something like this, to me, it speaks more of their own insecurities than it does about me. I know this isn't about me. I'm done playing sports. I'm supposed to be in dental school. This was by no means the route I wanted to take my life. I did not want to do anything within the political sphere or any kind of public speaking. That by no means, this is not for me. It's not for public advancement. I wouldn't have spent this last year, especially the first part of last year, months traveling everywhere out of my own pocket. So to say that this is for likes or for clicks, it proves she's never gotten past the headlines of an article. It's that to me is silly. So I truly accredit sports though, to the confidence and the leadership and the security that I have to be able to take these arrows. A lot of the negative comments I get, it's nothing about my argument, because again, you can't really dissuade from my argument. It's personal attacks. It's, your hair looks like extensions, your extensions are ugly, but this is my real hair. Someone yesterday said, you need to take your fake eyelashes off. I'm like, these are my real eyelashes. You have people who say, maybe you should have just trained harder. I'm like, novel idea, never thought of that one. So I don't let a lot of the negative comments bother me, because again, I think it speaks more of the person who's saying it than the person who is receiving it. And also I want to say, Katie Porter has never played a sport in her life. Therefore, she does not understand what it means to play a sport, especially at the collegiate level.
I'm Ms. Gaines. I saw your speech might have been a week ago. It was in Buffalo, New York.
Yeah.
I don't remember if this is a question that's asked of you or this was you professing your support for it, but one of the kind of solutions I've heard was like a need for a third option, like a third bathroom, a third barracks. I was just wondering if that you did have a support for that, and if you were to have like further testimony or not. How would you describe to legislatures that maybe are less sympathetic in their kind of ideal solution for this? Why it would be necessary to provide that kind of financial support for those third options for that kind of infrastructure?
Right. I think in an ideal world where there was the financial means, where we could garner enough people to play in a third league or a separate non-binary team or whatever that looked like, I think it would be a great solution. It's something that, of course, would ensure everyone athletic opportunity, everyone chances for athletic success. It would ensure safety and fairness and all of the things. And so in an ideal world, I think that would be a good solution. But we know we don't live in an ideal world, and realistically, I don't know how viable it is, that option is, in terms of the finances, in terms of, like I mentioned, having enough people to play in this league or on these teams. So there's no perfect solution that could encompass what everyone wants. But I will say the state bills that are being passed in these different states, again, the opposition, they always say this is a bill that bans trans athletes from competing. That is not true. No one is being banned from competition. No one should be banned from competition. I wholeheartedly agree with that. No one, regardless of your race, your sex, your gender identity, your age, whatever sport you play, no one should be barred from playing sports. Of course not. And so what these states are introducing is you just compete with your biological sex. And while that might, again, not appease everyone, it is a way that everyone is still able to play. And so while organizations and governing bodies and sporting bodies are working out the kinks, this is still a way that everyone can play. So there's no perfect solution, but I think as long as we keep having discussions and talking about this and working together to figure out perfect solutions, it's a way everyone can still play.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ms. Gaines, thank you for coming to Clemson. I'm a member of our Turning Point chapter here, and on behalf of the chapter, thank you for being here. So I'm not a woman, nor do I claim to be, but I don't really play that many sports, but I have a sister who plays sports, and she's a senior in high school now. Thankfully, she hasn't had to go through what you had to go through, and you're one female athlete who's spoken up and made a huge difference. And if more female athletes like you did speak up, then it would make it even bigger difference and probably put an end to this crap. But if, like you told the story about the girl in Vermont, like those are just the consequences that you face. So my question to you is, how do we get more female athletes to stand up the way you stood up and fight against this?
This is hard because this past year, I've really been trying to encourage Leah Thomas's teammates to, use your name behind this. Even if you don't want to use your name, use your stories. One of Leah's teammates told me a story that I haven't shared publicly because she asked me not to, but I'm going to. I just won't use her name. But they were at a training trip where they're changing, and there was a club team who was practicing. It was a team of 8 and unders, and they're in the locker room after this, and Leah was undressing next to a 5-year-old girl. And I told this girl, you don't have to use your name, but this story is so powerful, not because it's a wonderful story, but because it perfectly highlights what's happening. And she doesn't feel comfortable. They see what happens to me when I go to San Francisco State, and they're terrified. They don't want that to happen to them. And so I'm working on ways to encourage people to speak out. That was part of talking to Peyton, who was the girl who was hit with the volleyball. This was her first time publicly speaking out today. And it was hard to really get her to feel comfortable. And I think a lot of it too is, no one's comfortable with public speaking. No one's comfortable with getting in front of a camera and talking about this, which I sure as heck wasn't. But I saw what's at stake if someone doesn't do this. And so we've seen this happen. This issue isn't unique to America. It's happening all over. So in England, what they've done, they had one shot put athlete. Her name is Amelia Strickler, and she spoke up, and it caused an influx of professional Olympians over in England to speak up. And they handled the situation properly. And so I think what we need here is a professional, someone who's well known, whether that be Serena or Venus Williams, whether that be someone of that caliber, male or female, to really stand up and say, this is wrong. I think more people would get behind that. But these women, they're really showing silence is complicity, and they're being silent. We've seen Megan Rapinoe, who was once someone who fought for women's rights and equal access, equal resources, equal pay for women in sports. We've seen Billie Jean King, who we really have to accredit Title IX to, who now both of these women have taken the total opposite approach, and they're now actively fighting for trans inclusion into women's sports. So I think to combat this, we need someone of high caliber, someone influential, impactful, female athlete or male athlete to stick up to this. And so I've been doing everything I can to try and encourage that, reaching out to different people who have admitted to me privately that, of course, they support this whole thing, but they don't want to lose sponsorships, so they don't feel comfortable talking about it. So it's hard to garner that, but I feel as if I really am hopeful that more and more people are becoming more bold. I think eyes are being opened. I think there are certain things, including the whole San Francisco thing that happened, that people realize, this is what happens just for saying men and women are different. And people are starting to, I think, really just get fed up with it. So I'm hopeful that tides will eventually turn sometime soon. It's just a matter of how long.
And we can only have 2 more questions. So.
All right, so first off, welcome to Clemson. So I may not be the first, but I'll definitely be the next to say that I am sorry for everything that happened to you. You are the national champion. How you were treated at San Francisco State is, of course, terrible. So my question kind of echoes the First Lady. From a guy's perspective, how can we help you?
So I call myself a modern day feminist. I believe in a level of codependency, but I also believe women deserve respect and equal opportunities. So I don't like to call myself a feminist. It's a modern day feminist. But what I say when I mean is I believe in a level of codependency. I'm very reliant on my husband for certain things. He's very reliant on me for certain things. And I think, again, I'm a Christian. The Bible says men are supposed to be protectors and they're supposed to be providers. And so we need men to regain this sense of masculinity. It seems as if that is almost few and far between, especially as, with this future generation. And so I'm sure every girl in here, we want a masculine man. So we need men to be willing to stand firm, stand strong. Don't back down. Don't be pansies, shall we say. I think it's really important. I really do. I think, of course, this is a movement that primarily affects women, but we could still use men at the forefront of this. Ultimately, we, of course, need women to stick up for ourselves, but we need men to also use their voices to stick up for us. It's important. It gives us the feeling and sense of, again, just protection when we have those men at the forefront of this. So I think it's really important for men to speak up, even young boys. I think it's important for parents to teach their sons this. But yeah, I like that question because the whole male perspective kind of gets lost in a lot of this, but it's really, really important.
Hi, so as a current student athlete here on this campus myself, I was wondering if you have or your recommendations in how to approach a team divided, whether it be small or large, in these sort of topics, because even in our group chat today about a different topic similar was to respectfully keep your opinions to yourself. And it's hard to even start a conversation when they automatically are do become the emotional approaches or attacks on faith or your stance or your upcoming.
This is definitely an ongoing problem. This is the same thing with Leah Thomas's teammates. When I'll tell another story of one of these girls told me, a different girl, when she was in high school, she was sexually assaulted, raped by someone she didn't know. And so when Leah began to transition and use their locker rooms, of course that was traumatic for her. That caused her a great deal of anxiety. And so she immediately went to her team captains, and they were kind of just we can't, there's nothing we can do. Can you just keep that to yourself? So she went to her coaches and expressed the same concerns. And her coach said, I'm sorry, you have to be kind and you have to be inclusive. Which again, is just gaslighting these girls. And so I think it's important to be able to have a space where you can have these conversations. Again, you won't all agree. You will have different opinions, even if it's on different What I've noticed with this whole movement is there are even lifelong liberals who, we could not agree on a lot of other topics, but we agree on this. And so I think just encouraging people, look, this doesn't have to be party lines. This is not something that even has to be political. I really hate that it's gone the political route. It was inevitable that it was going to, but I hate that. Sports is something that should never become political. And so I think reiterating, look, let's have a space to have an open dialogue. This is not something that should translate into our personal lives. This is not something that should affect how we play as a team, how we work together as a team. But having those conversations is critical. Being able to express freely how you feel, because what we're seeing so much of is women get told they're wrong for feeling uncomfortable in a locker room, or women being told it's not that big of a deal when they're losing out on opportunities. And so being respectful, of course, being compassionate, having this sense of understanding for each other, but standing in truth. Something I've realized is we have a lot of people who compromise on absolute truth at the expense of not wanting to hurt feelings. But again, that's why we've gotten here. We cannot compromise on truth anymore. I think we can do so not compromise on truth while being compassionate, and that's the kind of environment that needs to be created. Can you do one more?
Okay. Hi, I'm a current athlete at Clemson as well, and I'm the president of Student Athlete Advisory Committee. I just got reelected for my second year. I thank you. I have a great relationship with the commissioner of the ACC, with our athletic director, and several people who work in our administration. But to be honest with you, I didn't even know if I was going to ask a question because I'm so nervous to speak out. I speak as the voice of our athletes here and change in our administration, and I don't want to step on toes, especially because I'm trying to get a job in college athletics. So for you, if you were in my shoes, how would you, take that?
Well, if it's any consolidation, this was the exact way I felt. Applying to dental school, I was terrified. I thought, surely I'll do this. I'll never get accepted, even though I scored in the top percentile of the DAT. My GPA was great. I had the things to back me that would permit me getting into dental school. But I did it anyways. And when I was applying for school, all my interviews, every single interviewer brought it up. Every single one. And they act relatively neutral. But after the interviews, every single one of these people said, your leadership is incredible. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And I got accepted into all these places. So that's something I was really fearful for, if that's any consolidation to you. But first of all, congratulations. That's a very exciting position. You have a lot of responsibility, but you have a lot of responsibility. So I think being in this position, you have an influence, you have a platform, you have relationships with people who, can make these changes or can help advocate to make these changes. And so I think having personal conversations with the commissioner or with your athletic director and just bringing it up, seeing how they feel about it. It shouldn't be controversial, but of course it's kind of this touchy subject. And so kind of feeling it out, getting a sense of how they feel and communicating back to them that, look, this is how because you're a spokesperson essentially, this is how we as this body, as our SAC committee, our athletes, this is how we feel, and I'm communicating this message to you. And so it doesn't have to be something that's necessarily coming from you personally, but communicating the bigger message at large. I think you have a really good position to help advocate for change, but I know it is really scary. It's a terrifying position to be in, to know what you could potentially lose out on by speaking up. But again, in my experience, I've had nothing but opportunities in speaking up. The support is tenfold to anything negative. So I think they want you to be scared, but you have a lot of power and influence with your voice and your platform. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for attending this evening. Again, if you'd like to connect with our Clemson YWA chapter. You can follow us at YWA Clemson on Instagram. And yeah, thank you so much for attending.
Thank you. Yes, of course. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you.